I drove 4 hours to see my daughter's new house. She didn't open the door. I stood on the porch in November with a casserole dish wrapped in a tea towel and a card I'd spent 20 minutes picking out at Shoppers Drug Mart. The porch light was on. I could hear voices inside. I rang the bell again. My son-in-law opened it maybe 3 inches, just enough to see his face. "This isn't a good time," he said. I told him I'd called ahead. I told him I'd driven from Sudbury. I told him his wife, my daughter, had said Sunday afternoon was fine. He looked at me the way you look at someone who's shown up at the wrong address. Polite enough. Final. "She's not feeling well," he said. "I'll let her know you came by." And he closed the door. I stood there for a moment. The casserole was getting cold in my hands. A crow landed on the railing at the end of the porch and looked at me and flew away. I walked back to my car. I put the dish on the passenger seat. I sat there for a few minutes with the engine off, looking at the house I had helped her buy, and then I started driving home. I didn't cry until I hit the highway. My name is Audrey. I'm 64 years old, and I have spent most of those years working. I worked at a dental office in Sudbury for 31 years, first as a receptionist and then as the office manager. I was good at my job. I was good at a lot of things that never got noticed, which is something you accept when you get to a certain age. You stop waiting for acknowledgement. You just do the work. My daughter's name is Tanya. She's 36. When she was small, she used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, and we'd watch the lightning from the living room window together. I would make her chamomile tea even though she was 5 years old and couldn't really taste the difference. She liked holding the mug. She liked feeling like a grown-up. I raised her mostly on my own. Her father, Gordon, left when she was 9. He moved to Kelowna, sent birthday cards for a few years, and then the cards stopped too. It was the 2 of us after that. Me and Tanya in that house on Lawrence Street with the drafty windows and the woodpile we had to keep restocked. I learned how to replace a toilet flapper from a YouTube video when she was 12. I learned how to file my own taxes. I learned a lot of things I never expected to learn because there was no one else to learn them. She grew up fine, I thought. She had friends. She got her grades. She left for university in Ottawa, and I drove her there with her whole life packed into a rented cargo van. I cried in a Tim Hortons parking lot on the way home. That was the first time I understood what people meant when they said your children leave and your house stays the same size. She met her husband Wesley in her 2nd year. He was from a family in Oakville. Comfortable people, the kind who had a proper dining room and took vacations in February. I don't think he'd ever met anyone from Sudbury before Tanya. I sometimes think that was part of the appeal for both of them. They got engaged when she was 28. I was happy. I was genuinely happy. Wesley wasn't warm exactly, but he was stable, and she seemed to love him, and that was what mattered. I told myself I liked him. I said that to enough people that I almost believed it. The wedding was in Muskoka. His parents paid for most of it. I contributed what I could. $3,000, which was a lot for me at the time, and I think that's where it started. Not the money itself, the difference in what the money meant. To his family, it was a small check. To me, it was 2 months of careful saving. No one said anything about that, but I always felt the gap. After the wedding, she changed. Slowly at first. The calls got a little shorter, a little further apart. When I drove down to visit, I always drove to them. They never came to me. There would be an energy in the house, a kind of politeness that felt like distance dressed up as manners. Wesley would say the right things. Tanya would say the right things. and I would drive back to Sudbury trying to figure out what felt off. I told myself I was imagining it. I was 61, living alone, and probably too sensitive. That's what you tell yourself. 3 years ago, Tanya called me on a Tuesday evening. She sounded excited in a way she hadn't sounded in a long time. They'd found a house in Barrie. They wanted to put an offer in, but they were short on the down payment. The market had shifted, the numbers had moved, and they needed $60,000 to make it work. $60,000. I want to be honest about what happened inside me when she said that number. There was a moment of pure cold fear, and then there was a longer moment of calculating. I had a retirement savings account that I'd been building since I was 30. I had what I'd saved after selling the house on Lawrence Street when it got too expensive to maintain on my own. I had a nest that was modest but real. I was not a rich woman, but I was a careful one, and careful had added up. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 3 days. I talked to my sister Brenda, who lives in Timmins. Brenda said, "Don't do it." Brenda said, "You will never get that back and you know it." I said that was her daughter and Brenda said yes, and that's exactly why I did it anyway. I want to say it clearly. I did not give her the money because I expected anything in return. I gave it because she needed it, and I had it, and she was my daughter. That is a simple sentence, and it was a simple feeling. I transferred the money into her account on a Thursday morning in March, and she called me and cried a little, and I cried a little, and I told her I loved her, and she said she loved me, and I believed her. I fully believed her. They moved into the house in Barrie in May. I helped her pack in Ottawa. I packed boxes for 2 days, labeled them, organized them by room. I made a spreadsheet so the movers would know where everything went. I just sat at tea that 2 Barrie with a car full of things she'd left behind, and I helped her unpack the kitchen while Wesley handled the technical things, the internet, the TV mounting, the things that required receipts and apps. I was in that house for 3 days. I scrubbed their new bathroom floor on my hands and knees because it had come dirty from the previous owners. I hung the curtains in the guest room. I made a big pot of turkey and vegetable soup and left it in their fridge. When I left, she hugged me at the door and I thought, "This is fine. We're fine." I should have known something was happening when the call stopped. It was gradual. Weeks would go by. I would text and she would reply with something short. "Busy. Things are hectic. Talk soon." I sent a birthday card with a check inside and she texted me 2 words, "Got it." I called for Easter and it rang through to voicemail. I left a message. She texted back the next day, "Sorry, was out. Happy Easter." I started to feel something I didn't have a good word for. It wasn't anger. It was more like looking for a door that should be there and finding a wall instead. The Sunday visit had been her idea. She'd called in October, a real phone call, longer than usual, and said they wanted me to come down and see how they'd finished the basement. She said Wesley was doing a big renovation. She said, "Come on a Sunday and stay for dinner." I wrote the date in my calendar in red pen. I packed the casserole, chicken and wild rice, her favorite since she was a teenager. And then her husband answered the door 3 inches wide and told me this wasn't a good time. I drove home in the dark on the 400 and I couldn't make sense of it. I tried calling her 3 times that night. She didn't pick up. I texted, "I came all this way and he wouldn't let me in. I need to understand what's happening." She texted back at 11 p.m., "Mom, I think we need some space. We'll talk when I'm ready." I read that message about 40 times over the next week. I didn't understand what I'd done. That's the part that kept me up at night. Not the rejection itself, but the blankness behind it. When someone hurts you over something, you can at least examine the something. But there was nothing I could examine. I had given her $60,000. I had packed her boxes and scrubbed her floors. I had driven 4 hours in November with a casserole dish. What had I done? I called Brenda. Brenda did not say I told you so, which is one of the reasons I love my sister. What does Wesley's mother think of you? She asked. I thought about it. His mother, Constance, had always been pleasant. But pleasant the way a dental waiting room is pleasant, designed to make you comfortable until the real business begins. At the wedding, she had told someone, I overheard it across a table, that Tanya had done so well for herself. She'd said it like she was talking about a renovation. I don't know what happened in that house in Barrie after the move. I didn't know what was said about me, or how I was described, or whether there was a specific conversation where I became a problem to be managed. I only know what I experienced, which is that my daughter slowly became unreachable, and I spent months assuming I had somehow caused it, the way mothers always assume they've caused it. Christmas that year came and went. I spent it with Brenda in Timmins. It was fine. We made shortbread and watched old movies, and she pretended not to notice when I went quiet. New Year's, I was home alone. I don't mind being alone. I never have. But that night I sat in my kitchen in Sudbury with a cup of tea and looked at the card Tanya had sent. It had a printed message inside, one of those generic ones about family and warmth, and she'd signed it Tanya and Wesley, just like that, together, like a unit with no individual handwriting. Like the person who used to hold a mug of chamomile tea because she liked feeling grown-up had been replaced by a signature. I put it in a drawer. I didn't throw it away. I don't know why I didn't. In February, I tried once more. I just sat at night to bate. I know, but I needed to see her face. I parked on the street. I walked up to the door. I knocked. She opened it this time. Just her alone, and I thought for 1 second that it would be okay. But her face, I had seen that face through chicken pox and broken hearts, and the afternoon she didn't get into the grad school she wanted. I knew every version of my daughter's face. This one was closed in a way I hadn't seen before. Mom, she said, I told you I'd reach out when I was ready. I said I hadn't heard from her in 3 months. I know, she said. That's because I'm not ready. I asked her what she was not ready for. I asked her to help me understand. I asked her to please just tell me what I'd done. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, Constance says you've been telling people about the money. That you gave us the down payment and you're holding it over us. I stood there. I haven't told anyone about the money, I said, except my sister. She said Constance had heard it differently. I asked who Constance had heard it from. She didn't answer. I drove back to Sudbury, and I did not go inside right away. I sat in the car in my own driveway in February, cold, and I thought about what it meant that my daughter had looked me in the eye and told me her mother-in-law's version of a story over mine. I thought about $60,000. I thought about the bathroom floor. I thought about a casserole going cold on my passenger's seat. And I thought, this is what I have left of her. The call came in April. I was at work. My phone buzzed twice, and I ignored it. And then it buzzed again, and I looked down and saw Wesley's name. He had never called me directly before, not once in 8 years of him being my son-in-law. I stepped out into the hallway. He was crying. That's the first thing I noticed. This man who had barely looked at me at his own wedding was on the phone crying in a way that sounded like he hadn't cried in a long time, and it was all coming out at once. He told me Tanya had left. Not left the house, not left for a few days. Left. packed a bag while he was at work on a Thursday, took the dog, took her laptop, left her ring on the kitchen counter with no note. He'd found out through her Instagram, which she'd unlocked from private an hour after she left. She'd posted a photo with a man, someone she worked with, apparently someone Wesley recognized immediately. And the photo had a location tag, and the location was Whistler, British Columbia. He said, "I don't know who else to call." I pulled a chair from an empty office and sat down, and I listened to him talk for 40 minutes about the signs he'd missed, about the renovation project she'd said was for both of them, about the money, our money, that he'd apparently used to do more than just buy a house. I asked him what he meant. He was quiet for a moment. "The $60,000, he said. "There was a second account. She found it about a year ago. I've been moving money into it, not a lot each time, but it added up." I said, "How much?" He said, "Almost all of it." I did not yell. I want to be clear about that. I did not yell because I was 63 years old and I had been surprised by enough things in my life to know that yelling uses up energy you'll need later. I said, "And Constance, does she know about the account?" He went very quiet. "Wesley," I said, "did your mother know?" He said she had helped him set it up. She had a friend, a financial advisor, and she'd thought it was the practical thing to do. She'd said he should have his own security. She hadn't thought of it as. He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. She hadn't thought of it as what it was. My $60,000 had been moved, gradually, carefully, into an account that my daughter didn't know about. An account set up with advice from his mother, using money that had come from mine. And when Tanya found it, the story that reached her, through Constance, through that pleasant waiting room smile woman, was that I had been bragging about the money, that I was holding it over them, that I was the problem. You understand what that means. You take a moment to sit with it, as I had to. My daughter had frozen me out for a year and a half because she had been told I was the one who couldn't be trusted. I won't tell you what I felt in that moment, because I don't have accurate words for it. It was big and cold, and it took up my whole chest, and I sat in that hallway at work with the fluorescent lights humming and the sound of the front desk phone in the background, and I just held it. I went home that evening, and I called a lawyer. Not because I expected to get the money back, I had already made my peace with the money, but because I needed to understand what had actually happened. I needed to know if what Wesley had described was what it sounded like. It was. My lawyer, a woman in her 50s named Carol, who had a very calm voice and very direct eyes, explained to me that what Wesley had described was potentially financial fraud. That money given as a gift for a specific purpose, a down payment on a jointly held property, being redirected without disclosure was not simply a marital problem. That there might be legal avenues, that depending on how the account was structured, there could be questions about the involvement of a third party, meaning Constance. I did not pursue it aggressively. I want to be honest about that. I could have. My lawyer said I could have. But I am 64 years old, and I have spent too much of my life in conflict, and what I wanted was not a courtroom. What I wanted was my daughter back. She called me in May. Her voice was different. Not the closed-door voice, not the voice from the February doorstep. Smaller, more like herself. She said, "Mom, I think I made a mistake." I said, "Which one?" There was a pause, and then she said quietly, "All of them. I am not going to tell you that we fixed everything in one phone call. We didn't. We have been in the process of fixing it for 8 months now, and there are still days when it's fragile and strange, and I choose my words carefully. She is living in a rented apartment in Barrie. The divorce is moving through the system. Constance has not reached out to me. and I have not reached out to her, and I think that is probably the correct arrangement. The house is complicated, legally, financially, in every way. My lawyer is still involved. There are conversations I am not able to have in full yet, but what I can tell you is that my name is on the original transfer documentation, that I exist in that paper trail, and that a 64-year-old woman who drove 4 hours with a casserole in November is not nobody in this story. Last month, Tanya drove up to Sudbury. First time in 2 years she'd been to my house. She stood in my kitchen doorway and looked around at everything the same way she used to look at the lightning, like she was very small and the world was very large, and this was the one place she knew. I made tea. I made the same chicken and wild rice casserole because I had already bought the ingredients, and because some things you don't change. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. We talked about Gordon and how she used to be afraid of thunder. We talked about the cargo van and the Ottawa apartment and the spreadsheet I made for the movers. She cried twice. I cried once. At the end of the night, she stood at the door to leave, and she said, "Why didn't you stop talking to me after everything?" I thought about it for a real moment, not a polite pause, an actual moment of checking. "Because you're mine," I said. "That's all. You've always been mine." She drove home in the dark, and I washed up the bowls and I stood at the kitchen sink looking out at my backyard. The same backyard, the same November dark, the same Sudbury sky. And I understood something I hadn't been able to name before. I had spent 2 years wondering what I had done wrong. 2 years trying to find the mistake I'd made, the thing I'd said or not said, the moment I could have turned a different way. And there wasn't one. Sometimes people let other people convince them of a story that isn't true. Sometimes love gets used as a lever by people who want something. And sometimes a mother drives 4 hours in November with a casserole and gets a door closed in her face, and the door has nothing to do with her at all. I slept better that night than I had in a long time. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because I finally knew which story was mine. I keep coming back to the casserole dish on the passenger seat. That's the image that stays with me. Chicken and wild rice going cold in November, and me sitting in my own car in front of a house I helped pay for, trying to understand what I'd done wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. That took me a long time to accept, because when someone you love turns away from you, the first place you look is inward. You audit yourself. You go through every conversation, every visit, every word you chose and every word you didn't. And I did that for 2 years. I went through everything. I found nothing. Because the story that had been told about me wasn't mine. It had been built by someone else, handed to my daughter piece by piece until she believed it. What Wesley's mother did wasn't just dishonest. It was calculated. She looked at a woman who had given everything she had, $60,000, 2 days of packing boxes, a scrubbed bathroom floor, and she decided that woman was a threat. Not because I had done anything to threaten her, but because love that strong, that unconditional, makes people like her uncomfortable. It can't be managed or leveraged. So she found a way to make it look like a weapon. That's what I've come to understand about people who manipulate. They're not actually powerful. They need to work that hard precisely because they have nothing real to stand on. A person who is genuinely good doesn't need to rewrite other people's stories. Constance needed to rewrite mine because the true version, a mother who gave without conditions, made her look small by comparison. And Tanya. My daughter believed her for a time. I won't pretend that didn't break something in me. But I also know what it is to be slowly surrounded by a version of reality that someone else is building for you. It's not weakness. It's what happens when you trust people who are supposed to have your best interests at heart. She was in a marriage, in a house, in a life that was quietly being constructed around a lie. The fact that she eventually saw through it, that she found the account, that she left, that she called me, that tells me something about who she actually is underneath everything that was piled on top of her. What I want people to take from this is not that you should stop giving. I would give that money again, not to Wesley, not to that situation, but to my daughter, yes, because the love behind it was real and it remains real, and no hidden account can touch that. What I've learned is that you can't protect yourself from being betrayed by people who are willing to lie, but you can choose how you carry it afterward. You can choose to stay honest even when honesty was used against you. You can choose to keep your eyes open without becoming hard. And you can choose to stay standing in the place where you know yourself to be true and wait. Not forever, not without limits, but long enough for the truth to find its own way to the surface. It always does. I used to believe that in an abstract way, the way you believe things that sound right. Now, I believe it because I watched it happen in my own kitchen, over chicken and wild rice, with my daughter sitting across from me finally knowing the whole story. That's enough. That's more than enough.